Hello and welcome to the new Yankee workshop, Season 3, Episode 7, The Harvest Table. Norm looks through the Shaker Museum on Old Chatham, New York and finds a simple, beautiful design on which to base his version of a long harvest table made of cherry. With turned legs and a hand-rubbed Danish oil finish, the table features drop leaves that even when down allow chairs to be pushed in for a neat appearance. Enjoy!
Boy, I think you're going to enjoy this visit. We're at the Shaker Museum in Old Chatham, New York. That's about 2.5 hours from New York City and about 3 hours from Boston. It's filled with thousands of objects from the Shaker period. And the thing is that most of them are constructed out of wood, like these shovels. It's amazing that it's almost all wood with very little metal on the edges. Now, one of the concerns of the Shaker community was laundry. After all, the typical family was 80 or 100 people. And that could be a lot of clothes to wash every day. If they had a small load, they might throw it in a machine like this, which was hand-operated. And even the agitators were built out of wood. Now, if you had a lot of laundry to do, you might turn to a larger machine like this commercial version. It was driven by a belt that would move these wooden agitators back and forth. And when all the laundry was done, it would be removed and placed in these laundry baskets, again, made out of wood. Now, how's this for a butcher block? Supported by 3 legs, about 10 inches thick, and over a yard across, cut from a single piece of a sycamore tree, I've been told. Now, over here is the kitchen sink. Again, we see a lot of wood. A wooden base supporting a cast iron basin with a wooden backsplash, that more than familiar Shaker red. And it sure shows a lot of use. Well, I guess I'm lucky today. Somebody already took care of the dishes. Up here in the furniture gallery, there are some wonderful examples of classic Shaker design, like this trestle table. It's beautifully crafted. It must be 12 feet long. And I suppose if you had a room large enough, you could easily seat 18, maybe 20 people around it. Oh, and look at this, a drop leaf table. A little longer than most of the Shaker tables that I've seen, but you can see its purpose. With the leaves up, it's as wide as that trestle table. You could easily seat 10, maybe 12 people. And with the leaves down, like with any drop leaf table, it won't take up very much space when it's stored up against the wall. Now, and this is a feature that I like. You can slide the chairs under it for storage. Now, this table incorporates a lot of really good ideas. I think I should study it a bit more. I'd also like to take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these, safety glasses. Now I'll show you how I built today's project. When it came time to design our version of the harvest table, I had to take several things into consideration. One was that I wanted it to comfortably seat 6 to 8 people. So what you're seeing here is a table that's about 39 inches wide and 72 inches long. The other thing I had to take into consideration was the proportions between the fixed part of the table and the drop leaves. I found that on most of the elegant tables we looked at, the center portion is very narrow and the drop leaf is very wide. And with a wide drop leaf, you're unable to store your chairs underneath it like this. Now the legs, that was a place where there were a lot of different choices. Anything from a very elegantly turned leg to something as simple as a tapered leg. What I've actually done is made a combination, a tapered turning with a little bit of detail up here at the top. Now the choice of wood was cherry because it's beautiful, it's very resistant to abrasion, and there's not a better wood to turn. Let's get started today by taking these 3 1x8s and gluing them up to make the fixed part of the top. Okay, that's what it should look like. Okay. Now you'll notice that I've alternated my clamps under, over, under, over, under, and that's so that I'll minimize any tendency for the boards to curl as they're in the clamps. We'll set this aside and start working on the legs. All right. Now here's one of the blanks for the legs. It's 1 3/4 square solid cherry. And what I've done is just put a pencil line around the blank so that I won't cut into the square section of the leg. Because the first step is to go to the bandsaw and knock the corners off so that I don't have to remove all the material over on the lathe. Now I've installed the blank in the lathe, and the first thing I want to do is rough out the blank. And what I'm going to do is use a gouge on the tool rest, and up here at this point I want to just make it round. But down here on this end, the finished product is only about 1 inch in diameter, so I want to get it down to about 1 1/8 inches. Now to make sure that all 4 legs come out exactly the same, I'm going to turn to my lathe duplicator. And all it really is a template up here that I made out of hardboard, and it's a cross-section of the leg. Here's the straight part, there's the little bead, and then a taper from here down to the other end. Now the tool that does the work is this tool that rides on a flat surface, and on the upper portion there's a follower, which goes against the template, and down here a cutter that actually does the work. Now I've installed a triangular cutter, and I'm going to use that to cut the details first. Okay, I've now changed the triangular cutter to a square carbide cutter, and that'll make quick work of turning the taper. Now with the blank still in the lathe, it's a snap to do the sanding. I'll start out with a coarse 80 grit paper and finish up with about a 180 grit paper. I'm also going to speed the lathe up a little bit. Well, I'd say that just about takes care of the sanding. Now I'll cut it to the correct length. Now the rails at the table are joined to the legs by means of mortise and tenon joinery. Each leg needs 2 mortises. It's 3/8 of an inch wide, 4 1/4 inches long, and 1 inch deep, and they're on adjacent sides of the leg. Now to make the mortise, I'm using my drill press, which has been outfitted with this mortising attachment. It's nothing more than a drill slipped down through the inside of a square chisel. The drill removes most of the material, and the chisel squares it up. It's just an easy way of making square holes. The rails for the table are 3/4 inch thick by 5 inch wide cherry. What I have to do is put a tenon on each end of the rail to fit into the mortises of the legs. So the first thing that I did was attach an extension to my miter gauge. That'll actually make it easier to hold the long pieces. Then I attached a stop block, which is 1 inch from the outside of the blade, the length of my tenon. The first cut is the shoulder cut on the face of each side of the board, and it's 3/16 of an inch deep. Now, without changing anything except the height of the blade, which is now going to be 3/8 of an inch, I'll make the next shoulder cut, which is at the top and bottom edge of each board. The next step is to make these cheek cuts along the sides of the tenon. And to do that, I'm going to use my tenon attachment for the table saw. It rides in the same slot as the miter gauge, and it has a clamp on it that holds the workpiece firmly in place while I cut the sides of the tenon. Let's take a look up underneath our prototype. In the center, between the two long rails, is this cross piece. It's made out of pine, and it actually adds some extra support to the table and gives me another place for some blocks to fasten the top. The pine board is let into the rails into a dado, and that's what I want to cut next. Let's take another look at the prototype. I've set it up on a sawhorse so I can show you the mechanism that holds up the leaves. There's a couple little wooden spinners, one back here and one over here, because this is a relatively long table. And we'll start working on those next. Now here are the two side rails clamped together, and I've laid out the spinners. And the first thing that I'm going to do is drill a hole for the pivot point. The next thing to do is to cut along the bottom of the spinner. And I found that the best way to do it is to put the board firmly against the rip fence, and I'll hold it in place, keeping my hand far away from the layout lines. Slowly raise the blade up through the wood and cut from end to end. Now I'll finish cutting out my spinner, making the angled cuts with my little dovetailing saw. Now the mechanism for this spinner couldn't be simpler. A couple washers to make up the difference of the saw kerf and also to minimize friction. And here's something the shakers probably didn't have, a bugle head type screw. And that's all there is to it. All right, now we're ready for a little bit of assembly. Some glue on the mortise and tenon joint, and I can slip that together. Now I want to apply just enough pressure to squeeze the joint tightly together. Next, I'll drill some holes to secure the joint with some dowel pins. That's not going anywhere. Now this center cross piece gets held in place with a little bit of glue and some 4-penny finish nails. Now these pine corner blocks will add some strength to the frame and give me a place to fasten the top. Now I'll just nail a couple small blocks to the centerpiece. Well, now we're ready to finish off the table top. That center blank has had plenty of time to dry. And the first thing I'm going to do is scrape off any excess glue. Boy, I don't know how we lived without one of these for so long. They've had sanders like this in the auto body business for years, run by Air, random orbit sanders, which give you a perfectly smooth, swirl-free finish. I spent enough time to finish all the sanding of the blank. Then I trimmed it to width on the table saw and squared up the ends with my circular saw. First, I'll mill this detail. And to do that, I'll use my router, which is equipped with a 3/8" radius rounding over bit. I'm going to mill this edge in 2 passes, one to rough it out and one to fine-tune it. Let's look again at our prototype. We just milled this edge using our 3/8" radius rounding over bit. And now I'm going to mill the corresponding edge of the leaf with a 3/8" cove bit. And as you can see, I'm going to have to make it in about 3 passes. Now I'm ready to mortise for the drop leaf hinges. It's a special hinge. It has a short leaf which attaches to the fixed part of the table and a longer one that goes on the drop leaf portion. All the mortises for the hinges are the same. And since there's 12 mortises on this table, I felt it was worthwhile to make a jig. It's 3/4" thick plywood with an edge put on that hangs down that acts as a guide. It's an edge guide. You slip it up against the edge of the table, align the center line with my layout mark, and clamp it in place. Now the cutout that's in the jig is actually a 1/16 of an inch bigger all the way around than the mortise I need. And that takes into account the collar I've installed on the router, which rides on the inner edge of the jig. Now to square up the corners of the mortise, I'm going to use this little device here. It's a right-angled chisel set in a little body that you align in the corner, tap it with your hammer, and then just remove the waste. In order for the hinge to fit properly in the mortise of the fixed part of the tabletop, I also need to make a groove to recess the pin. And to do that, I'm going to use my router, which is set up with a 1/4" round nose bit and a rip fence. And you see, I want to have a little material remaining here so that I don't see that cutout from the edge. All right, now at this point we can attach the base to the top. Now these are the holes for the screws that will hold down the tabletop. Notice that I've elongated them so the top can expand and contract freely. Okay, that takes care of rounding the corners. Now the final woodworking step is to round over the top edge of the tabletop, and I'm using my 1/4" radius rounding over bit. Now this is the first step in the finishing of our harvest table. And you notice that I flipped it upside down, and that's so that I can apply the finish to all surfaces. I want the wood to be equally protected and to absorb any moisture or dry out evenly, and that way I won't get any warping. Now what I'm putting on is actually a Danish oil, and I've tinted it slightly with a little bit of wild cherry stain. Put a nice even coat on, let it soak in, and in a little while I'll wipe it down with a rag. I can control my final color by the amount of stain that I put in the oil and also how long I let it sit on the wood. The main idea here is just to rub it in so it's nice and even and get rid of any excess. Okay, now this is the second of probably about 6 coats, and this time I'm just using a rag to put on a nice even coat. Then the next step is to take some 600 wet dry sandpaper and rub it into the surface. And what this does is smooths out the wood, and it actually forces a little bit of the oil into the pores of the wood, making it penetrate deeply and preserve the surface. Okay, now once that starts to feel like it's getting a little bit tacky, you take a rag that's not soaked with so much stain and wipe off any excess. You can see it's starting to get a little bit of a shine, and believe me, the more coats you put on, the nicer it's going to look. One thing that's nice about using an oil finish on this cherry is that it'll get darker and richer with age.
Thank you for watching. For more, please like and subscribe.